All right, we are back with another part of our migration from Next.js to Laravel, and I kind of glossed over the server-side rendering when I was thinking about Laravel. When I think of PHP, I do always think of just like server-side rendering in general. I remember the days back of where you used to echo out HTML from the server, and so I think I made some assumptions here that I was just like, well, if I am fetching the data on the server in PHP, maybe it's also just kind of like doing some magic behind the scenes in Inertia and rendering out the template via SSR. And I don't think that's the case here. So I wanted to dig in a little further and figure out if there is more that I need to do to support SSR with Inertia and a React frontend. And it does look like there is some interesting information available on the Inertia.js site. Of course, look at this. Docs are there, imagine. So with a little bit of reading and some trial and error here, we're going to make sure that we do have SSR set up correctly in our application. And we'll just verify with all the different approaches described here in the documentation to make sure that we're taking advantage of as fast of a page load as possible. They also call out exactly right here, fully rendered HTML served by the application. It also allows for easier search engine optimization for indexing. Maybe that's not as important for this application, but it certainly is important for most applications. So we're going to go through and figure out how to set up SSR the right way within Laravel using Inertia. Doing a little bit of exploration from the existing code base that we have. When we use the starter kit, it does look like there's some kind of SSR flags that are installed right now. I'm wondering if maybe we can just do build SSR, build:/SSR, and have that be the correct output. I would have to, imagine that that's what that would do. But is there any kind of SSR support for dev mode? That I don't really know. So we're going to keep reading here and see what we can find out. Okay, in the documentation, it says as part of the setup for SSR, we would add a server entry point at resources.js/ssr.js. And it's creating that file. But when I navigate to that within my existing code base, that file already exists. And I did not write any of this. This just came with the install using the starter kit for Laravel, Inertia, and React. So this, I think, is doing some things. Let's keep on reading here to see if this is set up as expected. This file is going to look very similar to your resources.js app.js file, except it's not going to run in the browser, but rather in Node.js. Here's a complete example. Here's kind of some stub code here for an example. Looks like SSR.js file. When creating this file, be sure to add anything that's missing from your app.js file that makes sense to run in SSR mode, such as plugins or custom mixins. All right, so I didn't make any changes here. We're just going to keep reading through clustering. By default, SSR server will run on a single thread. That's probably okay, at least for now, so we can skip that part. Next, we need to update our Vite configuration to build our new SSR.js file. We can do this by adding an SSR property to Laravel's Vite plugin configuration in our Vite config.js file. So let's go ahead and navigate to the Vite config and see if that is set up for SSR in any way. Look at that, already is configured. SSR showing the resources.js SSR.tsx as the entry point for SSR. And let's update the build script to also build our new SSR.js file. So that is exactly what we currently have in our package.json file already, except it said dev::build. So just named a little bit differently. Now you can build both your client-side and server-side bundles with npm run, and then in our case, it would be dev::build. So maybe we should just give that a run that and see what happens. Okay, back over in the terminal, and I'm going to just run npm run build SSR. Building for production. Okay, and it looks like we do have some output that is SSR ready. Some chunks are larger than 500 KB. Nav bar, I wonder what's going on there. But that did look like it built successfully, which is, that's good news. So how do we serve this stuff? Now that you've built your client-side and server-side bundles, you should be able to run the node-based Inertia SSR server using the following command, php artisan inertia start SSR. Well, let's copy that. Head on over to our console, paste it in. And we have an SSR server started on port 13714. With the server running, you should be able to access your app within the browser with server-side rendering enabled. In fact, you should be able to disable JavaScript entirely and still navigate around your application. All right, so let's go back to our app. Interesting. Not sure what that WebSocket's all about, but we'll come back to that. Let's look here. And we do have some interesting information coming in. Well, it's an error. It's like not that super interesting, but it at least gives us an indication that this is getting hit somehow. All right, back in the docs, since your website is now being server-side rendered, you can instruct React to hydrate the static markup and make it interactive instead of re-rendering all the HTML that we just generated. To enable client-side hydration in a React app, update your app.js file to use hydrate root instead of create root. Okay, so for us, that is the app.tsx file, and it's saying you would want to replace create root with hydrate root. Okay, so copy that. We'll say hydrate root. Is that right? Why are we getting a squiggly there? Hydrate root L. So maybe just a little bit of a change in the syntax here. Let's copy this, head back over. All right, I'm gonna move this whole thing over here to hydrate root. And I don't think we need to do this anymore, so we'll get rid of that. A little bit of cleanup, hit save. And let's just go ahead and reload and see what happens here. All right, so hydration failed. Ooh, I remember these from Next.js. HTML did not match a client. As a result, this should be regenerated on the client. This can happen if SSR client component used a few things here. So I'm going to see if I can figure out what this is. But the good news is we are, I think, configured now correctly to attempt the SSR. And if it fails, the SSR rendering will be retried and regenerated on the client. So maybe this is kind of a fallback approach. So that's kind of nice. I guess I would have assumed the whole thing kind of just would have fallen over if there was an error, but it seems like it just kind of safely cascaded back to client-side rendering in this case. So that's kind of nice. So I'm gonna see if I can track down this error. Is there anything else in SSR that we need to know? Let's see. Deployment, we need to spin up another process to start the SSR server. To stop it, when you deploy a new version, you may need to restart it with that command and a couple of support for existing hosting providers. So I think that's it. Now we truly do have the correct approach towards SSR getting set up. I'm going to have to figure out what this mismatch error is, and I will debug that right now. But everything else seems to be configured in the way that it's actually hitting the SSR components now instead of the client-side rendering, which is pretty cool. All right, we are moving on to the next part of our Next.js to Laravel migration, and we're going to be taking a look at the form and what forms can do within Inertia Laravel ecosystem that maybe is a little different than we're used to over in Nextland. Is that a thing? Nextland. So we have this individual entry page, and there's this form at the bottom that says, hey, guess what? Mux can help you build live and on-demand video into your app. And if you fill out this form, we'll give you $100 credit. So simple form, first name, last name, email. Yes, it's cool if Mux follows up with me by email with that $100 credit. And we need to replace this functionality within Laravel using Inertia and React. So I'm going to take a look at in Next.js land, when we would fill out this entry form, what did we have here? So I'm just taking a quick peek at that page. There's an opt-in form component. Okay, so I'm going to go to opt-in form right here. And look at all this code here. So this is using form state, just some custom stuff that we've all set up here to handle this form submission. We use this form data, kind of build out the body, and then send a fetch post request to API subscribe endpoint using the body, and then kind of set the form state based off of that result. So I have a feeling that we're going to be able to reduce some of this code here. And I need to follow up on that feeling to find out if it's actually possible or not. So in Inertia, we do have this forms helper. Specifically, I'm looking at, they have this helper called useForm from Inertia. And it says, since working with forms is so common, Inertia includes a form helper designed to help reduce the amount of boilerplate code needed for handling typical form submissions. So check this out. We have this useForm. We set each form field and maybe the default values for those form values, and we get these destructured variables for return. We have the data, set data, which if we hook that up to an input, set data, that's what's going to kind of manage our state there. And then there's this submit handler where we can then just make a post request, which also is returned from useForm, kind of a wrapper around that fetch is what I'm guessing is going on here. And it's posting to a login endpoint that is configured on the server side. So we could see already kind of some significantly less code in this example here, which is pretty nice looking. And if I keep scrolling down, I found something else interesting in the Inertia documentation. They do have all this like, is the form dirty, unsaved form changes, default resets, so on. But there was this Wayfinder thing that really caught my attention. It requires Inertia 206. This is a new application, so we do have Inertia greater than 206 set up. And it allows us to actually import what looks to be the PHP file into our React application and infer some functionality, or maybe just the route endpoint from the controller file itself, which is pretty wild. We're putting PHP, I think, into our React application and then calling a function on it immediately. So there must be some magic happening behind the scenes, but check this out. We are just setting the defaults here. This doesn't actually hook up the set data callback that we need in the form fields, but look how clean this looks. So I think we're going to try this route and see if we can get this set up. All right, so we are going to need to set up an endpoint for this form. And if we take a look at the Next.js application, remember we were submitting this form to the subscribe endpoint. So that's right here. And we can kind of see how the handler looks. We were making sure that the user opts in and checks that box. And then we're inserting a new row into the Supabase leads table, returning some additional information, whether that was a successful insert and whatnot. And then returning that down to the client with the correct status code based off of if there was a failure or success. So pretty standard endpoint here. It is kind of like, looks kind of technical to me. So maybe there's some cleaning up. Let's see what this will look like in the Laravel ecosystem. So I'm going back over to the CLI and I'm going to do, I have to remember the name actually, PHP artisan, I think make controller. I think that's right. There we go. Make PHP artisan make controller. What should the controller be named? We're going to call this one the lead controller. What type of controller would you like? I'll tell you what, why don't we choose API and then we can rewrite this if we need to. So I'll choose API. What model should this API controller be for? We actually don't have the model set up yet. So I'm going to hit enter and lead controller is created. So let's just take a peek here. Yeah, so this is kind of setting up like a CRUD endpoint, which is not exactly what we're trying to do here. In fact, this might be better off called something like a submit controller or something, since it's not actually exactly what we need. But we're just going to remove some of this stuff. And maybe we'll use the store function here to handle this submission. So it's suggesting some input here that maybe we'll end up using. I don't think we even have the lead model created yet. So let's go ahead and do that too. So we'll go over to models. In fact, I think we can also do that here. Let's do PHP artisan make model. We're calling it a lead. Would you like any of the following? Form requests. That's kind of interesting. Let's call that form request. We don't need a factory. No migration because we already set up this database table in the initial migration. And there's more stuff down here. Resource control. That's probably good. So let's just call that. Interesting. Okay, so we have an app models lead was created, but also these HTTP requests. Store lead requests and update lead requests. And I don't know what that is. HTTP requests, store lead requests. So this looks like maybe it's doing some kind of pre-check on the requests that are coming in to see if the user is authorized to make the changes that are coming in via the request. So kind of interesting there. And then I want to look up the model here, class lead extends model, and we don't really have any information in here yet. So let's go and grab the shape of the table that was defined in the migration. And I'm just going to copy this. Copy, go back to my lead model. We'll go to Claude and say, make sure the fields are defined and writable. Okay, that looks good. So we're just getting some additional information here. This says that these particular fields can be filled out from the model request, and these are kind of typecasting the values that are coming in. So that looks good there. Back to the controller, we can now successfully import that lead create request all, and we'll send a response. So I'm going to double check on this part here to see if this is looking right, but we do also need to go to our routes handler and add a route that handles this request. This is starting to get a little messy here. Probably could clean this up a bit, but we'll send a post request to /lead, and we would want to, we'll import the lead controller. That's going to call the store method on the lead controller, and we're saying the route is called lead. So the post request will go to an endpoint called lead, and that should store the request successfully. Okay, I'm over in our resources.js components, guestbook entry, opt-in form component, and this looks exactly like it did prior to any changes from the Next.js application. So we need to go ahead and start incorporating the Inertia specific code here. So I'm copying their example. I'm just going to paste it up here at the top. We got useForm, and we want to import the lead controller. Now, this is kind of interesting. I don't know what I would need to do to get my application to think that this is acceptable. Can I put an @ there? Yeah, I mean, I don't really know. But let's just keep working with this here and see what it gives us. Okay, so we have useForm, and we need to update the fields here. So I'm going to be lazy and say update fields to match inputs. Okay, we'll accept that. We probably want to pull the event ID from the server side, but we'll just configure it here in line on the client side for now. Form submit to the store function, which is imported up here. And the store, now remember, I think that this is what we're pulling from, not the model here, but the lead controller, this name right here. So we're going to call the store function from the controller if all is set up correctly. All right, just destructuring this outside of that form property. And I could also destructure, I think, a submit here. Okay, and this needs to be inside of our component, obviously. So I'm going to just come down here, hit paste. Now the old form had this concept of like tracking this form state if it was ready to submit or if it was submitting. We're just going to get rid of all this because it looks like Inertia handles all the form state internally. So I'm just going to start kind of stripping this back. Form state is not going to be a concept on this side. We'll get rid of this use effect. We don't need to track submission. Here we're saying success or failure. We also don't need to track that as far as I know. Get rid of this. And yeah, so there's this processing variable that returns from useForm, which is documented over here, processing. And if the form is submitting, the processing is going to be true. So I think we could use that in place of what was being recommended down here. Actually, none of this was during the processing. This was success or failure here. So we'll have to see what we need to do when we can handle the success or failure from the return part of Inertia. Now going through all the different inputs here, and I want to make sure that we're configuring them so the value is kind of controlled by Inertia. So I'm setting it to the data first name for the first name field, and then on change we'll set the data for first name within Inertia this way. So I'm going to have to do this, I think, for all these fields down here. On change, we'll set the email, and then is opt-in checked. We might need to adjust this one still too, but one small change we can make here is get rid of this form state and use the processing variable from Inertia to see if it's submitting, and then change the button text based off of that status. if the button is disabled, and this doesn't exist anymore. So let's go ahead and get rid of that. Just to clean up this on form submit, what I'm going to do is take our new submit to the store function and just replace all this stuff. So I don't even think I need to do the prevent default call. In fact, I wonder if I could just call this directly from the form callback inline, the on submit, but we'll call it like this for now. So we just got rid of a bunch of different code here. So we do have on success, looks like callbacks, and on error, but let's just see if we can get this basic form set up first. All right, so this is not going to be the pattern we're going to use here with this old form state. So I am just going to get rid of this, and we will reintroduce the different state handling as we get successful responses returned from this form. I really just want to get this form set up first. So mostly interested about if this actually compiles as expected with this importing the PHP into our React, which is so different to me. But let's see what happens. I think we have everything in place here. And the only thing I'm not entirely sure about, if I scroll down to this Wayfinder section, if we have to do any additional configuration around Wayfinder, since I haven't used it in this project yet, but let's find out. Yeah, I'm back over on the page and it's failing to resolve import from this section that we tried to import the actual PHP file. So there's probably some more we need to do here. Just looking at the documentation for Laravel Wayfinder, and it's saying that we should require the package in Composer and also install it in our NPM packages. And I don't think I see any of that here. Wayfinder, no. So we do need to get this installed. It doesn't look like it comes with the boilerplate. All right, so I'm going to copy the composer command, go over to our directory, run that to get it installed. And then I'm also going to install the npm package next right here. Lastly, we'll have to update the vite-config.js to also use the Wayfinder plugin. So going back over to that file, we will make sure to import it here at the top, Wayfinder, and then include it at the bottom of our plugins array within the vite config. It looks like everything is done installing. So let's see, we'll have to generate TypeScript definitions for your routes and your controller. So let's run this command to, it's PHP artisan Wayfinder generate. And this kind of got me thinking, I'm wondering if we're not actually importing PHP. I thought maybe there'd be going like some kind of transformation that reads the PHP file and does some auto magic transformation into JavaScript. Maybe that does happen, I don't know yet, but it also could just be generating some additional JavaScript that we're importing and not necessarily the PHP controller, which is like less fun, less magic, I think, but still makes sense. Over in my components area, I do see there's a routes, which is kind of interesting. I don't even know what's all in here. These are the webhook routes, some types, and then we also saw this Wayfinder directory. So there is some stuff that's been generated, but I want to see if this form is importing successfully yet. So let's hit save. And just to be safe, I'm going to restart our server. Yeah, we're running into some kind of error here. So here's the magic, and it does seem to be kind of the boring stuff, the boring way, boo, but there was an actions directory that was generated too. And inside of that actions directory, you can see it matches exactly our structure of our server side. There's app, HTTP, controllers, lead controller, and actions is actions, app, HTTP, controllers, lead controller. If I open that file up, there's that store method, which makes more sense, right? We can now import the store method from a JavaScript or a TypeScript file, and inside of that, it is making the actual call, is my guess, or to the return of the function for the configuration of the call to store this submission. So this does make more sense. I don't like to admit it, but we'll call it, we're going to go at actions app, and you can see that is now importing as we'd expect. This is still giving us an error, expecting 2 to 3 arguments. I do see a problem. There's no submit button, so that's not going to work. This looks like a classic case of class name does not exist. We can see the submit button is down here in white. Maybe the background, we don't have a BG pink anymore. Kind of hard to keep up with all this stuff. All right, tailwind blue. Oh, so background pink must have been something configured in our old application. There's a button, and don't know what happens when I click it to go ahead and try to submit this form. Let's find out. I got the network tab open. I'll click submit. It's not doing anything. Let's figure out why. So I'm noticing something interesting here in the docs. It looks like we're calling the store function directly inside of submit, but if I go and just see what that's actually doing in the source code, it's returning an object, right? We have an object with a URL property and a method property. However, if you look at the signature for the submit function, it's asking you to pass 2 to 3 arguments, method argument first and the URL argument second, which is not an object. These are individual properties. So I don't think we can actually call store here. I think we might need to say, let's just say like const props equals store, something here. And then within props, the first one it's looking for, remember, is method. I say remember, so I remember props.method. And then second is the URL, props.url. Look, and now it compiles. So I think the documentation might actually be incorrect here. I want to do something like this instead so that it's destructured and submitted properly. And I don't know what the options are supposed to be, but I'm not sure if we need additional options just yet. Maybe that's the data. I don't know. Let's go ahead and see what happens when we submit this. Okay, I'm headed back over to our application. I'm just going to hit reload. Ignore all hydration errors as though everything is working perfectly. Dave@mux.com if you want to send me love letters. And then let's check the network tab here. I'll hit submit. All right, so it did make it to the server this time. Error, one table leads has no colony updated at. Now this is a error on the server side, but not from our client side application, which is good, but also just really interesting. So we had to make a change to the application so that it would successfully submit. We'll have to get in touch with the folks at Inertia about that to make sure their docs are up to date. I'm going to go ahead with a migration to add the updated at, created at fields to the leads table. PHP artisan make migration, add timestamps to leads. Okay, add timestamps to leads migration. Let's go ahead and open that. Add timestamps to leads. And you know what time it is. Let's just say add created at and updated at fields. Oh, wow. So there's even this nice little helper functionality for table timestamps and drop timestamps. That's kind of nice. So if I weren't so lazy, I could just remember that that was a thing next time. So let's save. And we'll go back to our console, PHP artisan migrate. Duplicate column name after leaves. So we already have a created at column. So I just need the updated at, actually. So let's do only handle the updated at column. Timestamp. Okay, that looks good. We'll accept. Save. Go ahead and try to run it again. All right, so now we should have that set up correctly. I'm going to go back to our form, type my name. Hello, Dave@mux.com. Yes, submit. All right, and it looks like that record did get submitted successfully. However, we didn't return the correct Inertia response, which is kind of nice. Actually, they decorate the response with that information as a message. So this is a really nice developer experience. As a developer, I'm not just seeing a JSON blob, but I'm getting a hint like, hey, you returned something and it worked correctly, but we actually need a valid Inertia response and not just a JSON response. So if I go to forms, I should be able to find out what kind of response I need to send back from the server side to make sure that we are getting the correct handling on the client. So in the Inertia docs, I'm seeing this return to route, and maybe we can pass the constructed route here somehow so that I basically just kind of want to send them back to the same page. So let's see what we need to do that. I'm going to copy that to route. I will paste it down here, and it's not going to be user's index. This is going to be something. So the AIs are suggesting that maybe I'm returning it to the entry named route and then passing the ID as a variable for the URL. However, clearly the lead event ID isn't actually the ID of the submission of the entry. So those are going to be two different ones. I don't know if the only way that I'm able to go back to the existing route where the request came from, if there's any way to just do that nicely without having to also submit the entry ID as part of this request. Let's find out if we can track that down. So I'm over in the Laravel docs now, and I'm seeing that they offer this to route is a function that's native in Laravel, but I'm also seeing they just have this back function, which is kind of interesting. I wonder if that would work for us. So I'm just going to say copy that, and instead of to route, I'm just going to return back, and I don't know. Sure, let's see if that works. This will probably have to do some additional validation on here in a bit, but I just want to get this set up and working as expected. So we have network. I'm going to take a look. Okay, we're going to call it Pete Butters with a Z, PD Zom, and submit. Cool. I think that worked. And then I guess I could check the database to see if that worked. And I need to figure out how I can determine if that was a successful response. There's probably that on success callback within Inertia, but we'll have to handle that to make sure that the user sees the appropriate message after submitting a form. But seemed to work. All right, I'm just going to see if we can have autocomplete take us to Valhalla here. So there's this third kind of options, form options, and I wonder if in here we could do at least some kind of logging to see if we get a successful submission. So I'm going to hit a reload. Bill is back. Billy at Billy. Man, cool domain. Yes, submit, success. All right, so we could do some handling with that, assuming that this would also work for a failure to make sure that we show the correct message in place of the form when we are back, or at least like on top of the form to show that the submission was successful. So this is interesting, just kind of like high level overview of the differences between the endpoint over on our next application versus this is the TypeScript endpoint. Here is the endpoint for the same handler in Next.js and the handler in Laravel. Sure is a lot cleaner. We do have to do some more validation here for sure, but even that is going to be probably just a handful, just a couple lines. And then if we look at the front end opt-in form, now we could have used, I think, a form library within the Next.js side that would have reduced some of this code too. This was all kind of done just with like browser native HTML. But if we take a look here, generally, this is a little bit smaller of a code base now. And ultimately, I think a little easier to understand just from the high level overview of what all of this stuff is actually doing. Now, we do have to replace this opt-in state management still, but this is going to be very similar where we can manage that state within the form itself, not necessarily using any of the React state here. So we could get rid of, I think, all of this stuff here at the top entirely, which would clean this up even further. But yeah, that was a good look, I think, at how we can move a form over to Laravel application using Inertia and React, and kind of compares some of the similarities and differences from what you might do in your next application. Good work, everybody. All right, folks, I've gone through many outfit changes. My hair has gotten longer and more out of control, but we're going to talk about how we can turn this application into the Laravel starter kit. And the real value add here from the way that I'm seeing it and understanding it is that what's different from just pushing an application up to GitHub and being able to clone it. It's the fact that when you use a starter kit, you're already entered into the Laravel ecosystem and running the install commands and the migration commands and the whole setup of the application is completed as part of the installation process, which is really nice to just have a starting point where you don't really have to go through the README and figure out, oh, I got to run this migration and do this. It all just kind of works once you have it installed. So I'll show you the process of turning your package or application into a Laravel starter kit so that you can join the movement of having your app being distributed within the Laravel ecosystem really easily. So the first thing that you'll need to notice or identify here is that your app has to be on the default main branch within GitHub. This is because when we use Packagist, which is another tool to communicate with and host your application, it always will check the default branch within GitHub. So what I ended up doing is overwriting my main branch, which used to be a Next.js application. Now it's a Laravel application. That's how they get you, I guess. So we have our Laravel app pushed to GitHub and it's all ready to go. What I did was update our composer details next within the composer.json file. And I changed the name from, this is the React starter kit that I started with Laravel, to match the GitHub slug that I have going on here. Our org is Mux Inc. and the slug is guestbook. So that's what matches right there. We can also probably update the description here in a bit, but I also added the envvars so that it's clear when you clone or create this application, what are the environment variables that you'll need to work with this app. So that was an important update in the composer.json file and the .env example to communicate what those environment variables need to be, and this will also connect with Packagist to ensure that this is the name of your Laravel starter kit. So now that that has been in place, we can go over to Packagist. You're going to have an account over here, which we already do. Ours is Mux Inc. SF, and there's the submit button here at the top. And when you click that, it's going to ask you if you want to submit a package. You can type in the URL for your package, which we have, again, right over here, muxinc.com/guestbook, and click on check. Now, I've already done this to make sure that it was working. However, we can just kind of see, and if I grab this, I'm probably going to get some message that says like this already exists or something along those lines. Yep. So what will happen here is it will check, make sure that the composer JSON file is all configured correctly. And if it looks good, then you can verify and submit. And it will pull your GitHub repository and create the PHP package out of what your code exists within the GitHub repository. So that step here is an important link because when you're using the Laravel new command to create a new application, Laravel application based off of a starter kit, this is where it's going to be looking up that information is over on Packagist. What's the code that it needs to pull to run that starter kit initiation? So that's step 2 there. And then the final step you'll see is to be able to go to your command line and just run the command to create the new guestbook. So the command here is Laravel new, and the next line here is the name of your application that you're going to be cloning. So we're going to say, we'll call it testbook. Laravel new testbook, and using is the starter kit template that we're going to be using to create this new application. So Laravel new testbook using Muxing guestbook. That looks good. I'll hit enter, and you can see it's now connecting with Packagist, downloading and installing all of the dependencies, running our migrations automatically, which is really nice, and then also prompting us to perform the npm install and npm build. So everything kind of just all happens automatically, and this application is now ready to rock. So if I do ls, I can see that the testbook is in place. I'll just go in that directory and see that all of our files are there as well. So I can just spin this up and use it like any other Laravel application. It's a really great way to be able to share a project that's in motion and open source the work that you have in place if you have an application that you want to share and give other folks a really easy starting point. So this was a pretty awesome value add to be able to find. Now, the other neat part about it that I want to call out, I haven't done this yet, but in the composer JSON file, Here under the scripts area, you can customize what happens as part of the new application process when you are pooling and cloning from packages. And that's under this post create project command. This specifies what should run after the project has been created. So we can see here that it's creating the database if it doesn't exist. It's running our migrations. And if we wanted to do more, we could add to this here. So, we do a comma and say, maybe we want to generate the Wayfinder routes. That's a great suggestion here. So just another part of how you can kind of customize the process of when this package is created. And also, maybe you run something entirely unique. In this case, maybe we would want to run like a seeder to have specific videos already exist within the guest book so that it doesn't start off completely empty. This all is just dependent on what you want your application to do, but a really great way to be able to customize the workflow here. So that's it. That's all I got for this video series. We covered a lot from the migration from Next.js over to Laravel. Hopefully there's something in here for you. And if there's anything else I can help with, feel free to get in touch with me. My name is Dave, and I'm Dave at mux.com. So long, everybody. Thanks for watching.